This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Neat Sahone, and today is Friday, and that means it's time for the 527th MTG Top 10. A couple of weeks ago, I did an MTG Top 10 on the most expensive lands. It was the first time I'd ever done an MTG Top 10 arranged by price, and most people seem to have enjoyed it, so today we're going to do another list about expensive cards, this time taking a look at the most expensive commons. Commons are, of course, well, common, but there are still many of them out there that cost a significant chunk of change. This is generally both because the card isn't available in great supply and because the card sees play in Magic's competitive formats and/or EDH. A card having common rarity only matters within a particular set, so if that set's hard to find, the commons aren't actually all that common. In this video, we'll take a look at the 10 most expensive commons, and I'll discuss why exactly the cards cost as much as they do. There are a couple of rules I made for this list. First, for a card to really be considered common for this list, it had to be available in a booster pack. This means cards that have a common symbol, but come from products like the Premium Deck series or our promotional cards, were excluded. These cards have a common symbol, but the rarity on cards in products like that is pretty irrelevant, so it doesn't seem right to really consider them with the cards that are on this list. The other rule is that a set can only appear on this list once. This is to keep the list interesting and diverse, and if I didn't do this, the list would have really just been cards from a single set. For any set that would have had multiple entries on the list, I'll be talking about the 3 most expensive commons from that particular set. Lastly, the prices available in this video are the near mint prices for those cards at Card Kingdom. As always, if you're interested in buying any of the cards that appear in this video, you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each of them in the description. Alright, without further ado, let's dive right in with a look at Magic's 10 most expensive commons. At number 10, it is Ice Age's Mystic Remora. This common costs $9.49. This powerful enchantment has a mechanic that people think of as one of the worst mechanics in the game, cumulative upkeep. If you've followed this channel for a while, you know that there are actually several cards with this mechanic that are pretty good, and I discussed them in a top 10. Now, it is true that cumulative upkeep is entirely downside. After all, it means you have to pay an ever-increasing cost each upkeep, and if you can't pay it or choose not to pay it, you lose the permanent. But a card like Mystic Remora is so efficient and powerful that it makes sense that it comes with that downside. It only costs 1 mana, but it makes it so that anytime your opponent plays a non-creature spell, they have to pay 4 generic mana or you get to draw a card. That's a tax that is very difficult to pay, so the Remora is likely to give you some pretty impressive card advantage before you get to the point that you can't pay its upkeep cost. The Remora is heavily played in EDH as the effect it has on the game gets even better when you're playing against multiple opponents. They all have to pay the tax or let you draw a card. But it doesn't only see play there. It's played in a lot of blue decks in Vintage, including Paradoxical Storm and Monastery Mentor decks. Like a lot of cards on this list, it's also used a fair bit in Pauper, a format that only allows commons. So, there's a lot of demand for this common between 3 separate major formats, and on top of that, it has never received a reprint, other than a Secret Lair reprint earlier this year. When I talked about the most expensive lands, the reserved list came up a bunch, but that won't be an issue here. Commons were never part of the reserve list, so there's at least some chance it gets a reprint in the future. For now though, it is a pretty typical example of a card that has scarcity and high demand, and that's how it manages to come in at number 10 on this list. At number 9, it is Cabal Ritual from Torment, which costs $10.99. Like other rituals, Cabal Ritual gives you a 1-turn mana boost. In this case, you pay 2 mana to get 3 back, and if you have Threshold, you pay 2 and get a much more impressive 5 mana back. Cabal Ritual has been great in Storm decks in the Eternal formats, as it gives you the mana you need to fire off a bunch of spells in a single turn before casting a lethal Tendrils of Agony. It also sees play in Pauper's Storm decks. The fast mana it provides is also highly sought after in Commander. Like Mystic Remora, it doesn't have a regular reprint, only receiving a premium version in From the Vault lore, so that means there aren't a ton of Cabal Rituals out there. At number 8, it is Snuff Out from Mercadian Masks, which costs $12.99. For 4 mana, Snuff Out can destroy any non-black creature. That is not a great rate, but Snuff Out makes up for that in a big way. You don't have to pay any mana at all if you have a swamp. Instead, you can just pay 4 life. And obviously, if you're a black deck, it's not a big ask for you to have a swamp in play. In a lot of ways, Snuff Out was Phyrexian mana before Phyrexian mana was a thing. It saw some play in aggressive black decks in Extended back in the late 90s and early 2000s, where getting a blocker out of the way for free was a great way to keep the pressure on your opponent. More recently, and more relevantly for its price these days, it sees play right now in Legacy and Vintage. In Legacy, it has most recently been played in Death's Shadow decks, where Snuff Out is particularly spicy, since it lets you get a blocker out of the way while also growing your Death's Shadow. In Vintage, it sees play in a wider variety of decks, but mostly as a sideboard card. Pauper is where it's done the most work though. It's simply one of the best removal spells in the format. And on top of all of that, it's also fairly heavily played in EDH. Like the other cards we've looked at so far, it also hasn't been reprinted other than in a special release, in this case the Liliana vs. Garruk dual deck. At number 7, it is Chain Lightning from Legends. While it isn't quite as good as Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning is a pretty good understudy. Like the Bolt, it does 3 damage to any target for only 1 red mana. Unlike the Bolt, it's a sorcery. It also comes with an extra effect that can allow your opponent to bolt you back should they have 2 red mana available, but that side of things doesn't come up a whole lot. It has enjoyed a lot of success throughout Magic's history. It was played at the very first major competitive event, which was the 1994 World Championship, appearing in 2 different decks that finished in the top 8 there. It has also found and continues to find significant success in Legacy, where it's been played in aggro and tempo decks like Burn, Zoo, Canadian Threshold, and Delver. Unsurprisingly, it also sees play in Pauper. Unlike the cards we've seen so far, Chain Lightning has been reprinted in sets with booster packs, including Eternal Masters, Battle Bond, and Jumpstart. Still, the original version has held on to a lot of its value. People simply like owning the original copy of cards. At number 6, we have 3 cards, all from Antiquities, and all closely tied to one another, the Urza lands. Within Antiquities booster packs, you could get cards with alternate arts, and the ones I'm showing on the screen here are the versions that are worth the most. These 3 lands, often called the Tron lands, all tap for 1 colorless mana, but if you have one of each of them in play, they produce a total of 7 mana. That ridiculous mana output has led to Tron lands being central cards in multiple formats over the years, including in Extended in the past and Modern and Pauper today. Most famously in Modern, you can power out Karn Liberated with these lands on turn 3. These cards have actually received reprints. For a long time though, it was only the version from Antiquities that had black borders, because it received reprints in old core sets, which always had white borders. They were recently reprinted in Double Masters though with black borders, which has led to their price dropping some, but they're still some of the most expensive commons in the game. At number 5, it is Lotus Petal, which will set you back about $24, and yeah, that's right, they once printed an artifact with Lotus in the name at the game's lowest rarity. This 0 mana artifact can be tapped and sacrificed to produce mana of any color, sort of making it 1/3 of Black Lotus, but it turns out 1/3 of Black Lotus is still pretty insane, as the Petal quickly proved to be a problematic card, since it sped up decks by an entire turn. This was especially problematic with combo decks during the so-called Combo Winter, a period between December 1998 and March of 1999. This was an era of competitive Magic where almost every format was dominated by combo decks. The Petal was one of many cards that were banned across multiple formats to put an end to combo insanity. It's actually still restricted in Vintage today, though it has since been unbanned in Legacy, and that is a format where it sees play, especially in Storm decks. It is one of the few colorless sources of fast mana at the common rarity, so it also sees a ton of play in Pauper, and EDH players love it too. For a long time, it had only received reprints as a premium type card, such as in the Kaladesh Masterpiece series and in From the Vault Exiled, but more recently it's been available in mystery boosters and as part of the list, which means it's possible to get the card from booster packs, though it isn't exactly easy to find them. At number 4, I have the top 3 commons from Arabian Nights: Oubliette, Rook Egg, and Army of Allah. Oubliette is basically a way more complicated black Oblivion Ring, Rook Egg is a 3-mana 0/3 that gives you a 4/4 flyer when it dies, and Army of Allah is an instant that gives all of your attacking creatures +2/+0 until end of turn. Of these, Oubliette is definitely the most impressive, as it's a strong removal spell, and as a result it's played a fair bit in EDH. It's also utilized in Pauper. The same can't be said of Rook Egg and Army of Allah. Rook Egg at least occupies an interesting place in the history of Magic, because it was one of the first cards where it became clear that templating and wording of cards needed to be more precise. Many early players thought the original wording on the card meant that if the egg went to your graveyard in any way, you would get a 4/4 flyer. This meant players were simply discarding the egg from their hand and making a 4/4 for free. It is fairly interesting though that Army of Allah is the third most valuable common from the set, as it isn't a good card and never has been. It isn't played anywhere. To be fair, the other commons in Arabian Nights aren't especially impressive either, as cards like Flying Men and Don Don come in right behind it. The value of these cards is largely propped up by how hard to find they are, as Arabian Nights is the third rarest set in the game. Oubliette did recently receive a reprint in Double Masters, and Rook Egg has been reprinted in the past too. But if you're looking to get all the cards from Arabian Nights, these cards are hard to find. At number 3, it is Rustic Study from Prophecy, which costs $42.99. If you play Commander, chances are you see this card all the time, as it's one of the most widely played cards in the entire format. Basically, if you have a blue deck and you have Rustic Study, you should be playing it. It's actually a lot like Mystic Remora, so you can see why people play it so much. It might cost more than the Remora does and tax your opponent less, but it also doesn't have cumulative upkeep and taxes your opponent when they cast any kind of spell. Whoever controls Rustic Study tends to generate absurd amounts of card advantage as a result. Unlike most other cards on this list, Rustic Study has never top-8'd any of the game's premier competitive formats, so its value is entirely a result of EDH. It has 2 relatively recent reprints, including in the Mystery Boosters and Jumpstart, but there still aren't very many Rustic Studies out there, certainly not enough for every single person with a blue Commander deck to have one. And that's what leads to this very high price for a common. At number 2, I've got the 3 most expensive commons from Portal 3 Kingdoms. 3 Visits, Forest Bear, and False Defeat. This is another set that only exists in very small numbers. It was designed for Asian markets and not actually released in North America. That plays a huge role in making these cards so expensive. Of the 3, only 3 Visits is a card that is actually in high demand, and that's why it's significantly more expensive than the other 2. 3 Visits is a rampant growth that searches up a forest, and importantly, it can be any card with the forest type, not just basic lands, making it some very impressive fixing. This has led to it being sought after for Commander. Forest Bear and False Defeat, meanwhile, don't see much play anywhere, and they aren't even especially unique. After all, Forest Bear is effectively an alternate version of Grizzly Bears, and False Defeat an alternate version of Breath of Life, and those are effects you can find pretty easily. 3 Visits is identical to Nature's Lore, but both of those cards are kind of hard to find, leading to the higher price tag on 3 Visits. And at number 1, surprising nobody, I have 3 cards from Alpha: Lightning Bolt, Lana Werewolves, and Dark Ritual. Obviously, there are a ton of commons in Alpha that are worth so much they could have made up the entire list, but that obviously wouldn't have been very interesting, so I decided to just include the 3 most expensive commons from the set, and they also sort of stand in for beta commons. Alpha is Magic's very first set, and it wasn't printed in large quantities, so commons from Alpha are the rarest commons there are. All 3 of these cards are fairly iconic ones that have been heavily played since day one. They were great back in 1993, and they continue to be incredible cards that have seen multi-format success in Magic's tournament formats, and they're all also in fairly high demand for EDH. Lightning Bolt is the best burn spell ever printed, Lana Werewolves is one of the best mana dorks ever printed, and Dark Ritual is the best black ramp spell in the game. That's why buying a single copy of all 3 of them costs almost $2,000. So those are the most expensive commons in Magic the Gathering. If you want to own any of these, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each of them. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including more that look at the most expensive cards in a particular category, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can by becoming a patron, by becoming a channel member, or by buying Neat Sahone merch. And you can find ways to do all of those things in the description for this video. Thanks for watching.